Hello and welcome to this tutorial, and in this tutorial we are going to talk something about game development using Android Studio. So let's say if you want to develop a game using Android Studio for your Android device. So in order to develop games for Android Studio, before starting the game development, what we need to do is that we need to install a gaming platform or a gaming environment so that we could develop games for our Android device. So there are multiple number of gaming platforms available in the market for developing Android games, but the platform which we are going to study for this tutorial is going to be the Libgdx. So before starting developing games by using Libgdx, we need to download and install Libgdx and we need to connect it with the Android Studio. So the first thing which we'll need to do is that you need to go to the Libgdx website, and the URL keeps on changing from time to time. So instead of typing in the URL, you just type in libgdx into Google. So the first link which pops up is going to be the link to the Libgdx. So we simply open it up, and as you could see, this is the official Libgdx website, and actually the Libgdx platform is developed by the Bad Logic Games company. So the reason why we want Libgdx as a platform for developing games is that we cannot directly write in Java code directly into our Android Studio to make a game. So and there are various reasons behind it. The first reason is that there are various complicated things which are involved while developing a game. For example, there are things like gravity, physics and all that which we'll need to take care of. So the platforms like Libgdx actually take care of each and everything by themselves. So it is crucially important that we choose a particular platform. Now one more platform which is famous for developing Android games is the Unity 3D platform, which can also be used to develop Android games, but for the sake of this tutorial and for the sake of this series, we are going to go with Libgdx, and we are going to use this platform in order to check how some simple games are developed. So the next thing which you want to do is that you need to go to this download link right here and click it, and the first thing which you need to do is that you need to click this download setup app, and when you click this download is going to start for you. And this is actually a jar file which is approximately 1 MB size. So we click on the keep option, and whenever you are going to open up the jar file, we are going to get a window like this, and in this window we need to specify a few things. So the first thing which we need to specify is going to be the name of our game. So let's say you name your game as my game, then you specify the package which is automatically taken care of. You don't need to actually typing anything here, and you leave the game class as it is. And next thing which you do is that you choose the destination where you want to set up your GDX. So if you go to browse and give a particular path, so what I've done is that I've created a new project, I've created a new folder on my desktop, and I've used the same folder in order to store the resources of Libgdx. Now the final thing which you need to do is that you need to assign the path of your SDK. Now if you have no idea where your SDK is located, then you could simply open up Android Studio, and once you open up Android Studio, you are going to have an option which is called as configure. So we simply click on that option, and inside, when we click on it, we get another option which is called as project default. So make sure that you click on it, and then we want to open up this project structure, which is finally going to give us the path of our SDK. So if you open project structure, as you could see, this right here is the path where your SDK is located. So we simply copy this path, go right here and paste our path inside the Android SDK path. Now once everything is done, it is going to show you 4 options. So these options are for desktop, Android, iOS and HTML, and what these options are, they are basically the options for selection of a platform. So let's say if you want to develop games for your desktop, then we select the desktop. If you want to develop for Android, then we select Android, or we select iOS. Or if you want to make a game for a website, or you want to make a web-based game, you select this HTML right here. But for the sake of this tutorial, we are going to go with the Android. So make sure that all the other options are unchecked, and we only check Android right here. Now in case of extensions, we are only going to select Box2D, and Box2D is actually used in order to develop 2D games. So once this is done, we simply click on this generate file, and it is going to download a bunch of stuff for us. And once everything is downloaded, the next thing which you need to do is that you need to associate your Android Studio with the Libgdx. So once everything is downloaded, you go to this destination path, which is in my case one folder which I have located on the desktop, and as you could see, this is the folder right here which I have specified, in which each and every file of Libgdx is stored. Now the next thing which we need to do is that we need to open up Android Studio, and once Android Studio is opened up, we need to select the option which is called as import project, and in the brackets we have Eclipse ADT or Gradle. So we simply select this, and inside this we want to specify a path which we have specified inside the Libgdx setup. So in this case, my folder is actually located on the desktop, which is called as Android Pro. So this is my desktop right here, and inside the desktop I have a folder Android Pro, and within this folder you have to select the file which is called as the build Gradle. So once you select this, you simply have to click OK, and your Libgdx project is going to get loaded into the Android Studio. So once everything is set up, this is what we are going to get, and in order to check or in order to test if you have done each and everything correctly, we just run our application. And I would recommend you that you don't run this application on the emulator, and that is because it is very slow. So instead of running it on the emulator, we directly run this app on our device. So make sure that your device is connected. So when we click this button right here, we need to choose our device. So I'll choose my Samsung device, and as you could see, this is what I could see on my device currently. So basically it is a red background, and we have a small image in the left hand side corner which is called as bad logic. So that's it for this tutorial, and I hope you guys understood what is Libgdx, why it is used, and I hope you guys are able to run your first application or your first game onto your device. So basically make sure that you specify each and everything correctly, the SDK path and the folder, and whenever you want to connect the Android Studio to your Libgdx, make sure that you select the path which is actually present, which actually points out to the Libgdx folder, and inside the Libgdx folder we need to select the Gradle file. So basically once your project is loaded up in your Android Studio, the first thing which you need to do is that you need to go to this test folder, and we have named our folder which is called as test. So we need to understand what is actually present inside this test folder. So as you could see, there are multiple folders in our test folder. So the first folder which we would like to pay attention to is the Android folder. So this Android folder basically contains all the files which are required to make our Android application, and the other folder, which is the most important one, is going to be the core folder. So whenever you are developing applications for Android, we make changes to this Android folder, and whenever we are making core applications which are related to the platform and which could run on each and every platform, we are going to make changes to the core folder. So now let's go ahead and study what is contained in the core folder. So if you go to the core folder and you go inside the source right here, and inside the source we are having a class which is called as the MyGDX game. Now if you switch to this class, you could see there is a bunch of stuff inside the class which is actually going to be used while creating our games. So there is a basic class which is called as the MyGDX game, which is nothing but the name of our game. Then as you could see, this class extends application adapter. That means it is going to use some of the methods in the application adapter. And then we have certain things which is called as the sprite batch and the texture. So now let me explain you what is a sprite batch and what is a texture. So whenever you want to display something in your game, or let's say if you want to display an image, so in case of Libgdx, we cannot directly display images onto our game. So instead of displaying images, for displaying images, first we declare an image as a texture. So this is our texture right here, and we have used the image which was already present in this project. So once we have the image, the next thing which we need to do is that if you want to use this image, you need to convert it into a sprite batch object. So a sprite batch object is nothing but whenever you want to display an object like a moving character or some object into your game, so it needs to be converted into a sprite batch object. So now let's go ahead and discuss what are these two methods. So this void create method is similar to the onCreate, which we have used in our Android application. So this method takes care of initialization of each and everything. So as you could see, it has created the two new batch objects. So as you could see, it has created a batch object, and it has also created the image object, which is the texture object. And this thing basically is going to execute the code when our application or when our game is going to load up in our device. So whatever code which we want to execute for initializing the objects in the game, we are going to mention them in the create method. Now if you go down and you have a look at the second method, which is the render method, the render method is actually going to print each and everything out onto our screen. So basically this render method right here execute the set of code which is present onto our screen. So this create method is going to initialize everything for us, and this is actually going to execute each and everything on our screen, each and everything which is written inside it, so that we could see it on the screen. And whenever we are going to run our game, these two methods are going to start executing automatically without us calling them. So that was a basic project structure, and in the next tutorial what we are going to do is that we are going to use the same project structure, and we are actually going to develop a simple game which is going to display a text, so that we could understand how things work while creating a game. And in this tutorial we are going to learn how we could display text in our game using Libgdx. So basically the next thing which we need to do is that we need to clean up the code. So one thing which we do is that we delete all the unnecessary things, and we are going to create each and everything from scratch so as to understand how this Libgdx framework works. So let's go ahead and delete everything. So let's delete the contents of the create as well as we delete the contents of this render. So now as our aim is to display some text onto the screen, so the first thing which we'll need to do is that we need to create a sprite batch object, as I've discussed earlier. So whenever you want to display something, you actually need an object in the form of a sprite batch so that you could display it on the screen. So the first thing which we need to do is that we create a sprite batch object. So if you have to declare anything, we go right here inside our class and we go outside our two methods and we create a sprite batch object. So in order to create a sprite batch object, first we type private, then we type in sprite batch, and let's name this object as simple batch. So we type batch, and as you could see, our sprite batch object has been created. So the next thing which we need to do is that as we need to display a text onto the screen, we use the object of the bitmap font. So bitmap font is basically a font which we are going to display text onto our screen. So we type private bitmap font, and let's name this object as simple font. So as you could see, our objects have been created. So now the next thing which we need to do is that we need to initialize this object. So as earlier explained, we do the initialization stuff inside this create method. So we go in here, and the first thing which we initialize is the sprite batch object. So we type batch equals new sprite batch. So basically we have initialized the sprite batch object. Now we need to initialize the font. So we type font equals new font or new bitmap font, as we have created the object for bitmap font. And now finally, let's say we want to set the color of this font. So we type font dot set color, and let's say we want to set the color to be blue. So we type color dot blue. So once our font is initialized, the next thing which we need to do is that we need to display these things by writing in some code in the render, and that is because render is the method which is going to execute the code for us. So whatever things we need to execute, we put them inside the render method. But before adding them into the render method, the next thing which we need to do is that we need to dispose of these images, or we need to dispose of these resources, and that is because whenever we have finished using them, they are going to keep on eating, they are going to keep on using the memory, and we are going to have memory leaks in our game. So in order to do that, we create a new method which is called as the dispose method. So we type public void dispose. So inside the dispose method, we are basically going to dispose of the resources which we have used. So the resources which we used are nothing but the batch and the font. So we type batch.dispose, which is going to dispose the batch on use, and it is also going to dispose font, so we type font.dispose. So basically this method right here is used in order to dispose of the resources once they are used. So now the next thing which we need to do is that we need to put this into the render so that actual text could be displayed on the screen. But before giving anything inside the screen or before rendering anything, we need to clear the screen. So in order to clear the screen, we have a method. So in order to clean up the screen, we type gdx.gl.gl clear color, and clear color is the method which we are going to use in order to clear the color of the screen by some color. So we are going to have 4 values inside this. So the first value is going to be for red, the second one for green, the third one for blue, and the final one for the transparency. So let's say we want to choose white, so we specify 1 for each and every option for red, blue, green, and the alpha, which is nothing but the transparency. Now once you have this thing set up, there is one more line of code which we need to write in order to initialize the screen. So that line of code is basically nothing but gdx.gl.gl clear, and inside it we specify gl20.gl underscore color and buffer bit. So once everything is done, we are basically done. Now we move on to our main purpose, which is displaying the text on the screen. So whenever you are running this render method, the thing is that you actually need to start a batch. So in order to start a batch, we have 2 things. First thing is you need to start the batch, and then you need to end it, and whatever code lies in between is going to get executed during the duration of your game. So let's first go ahead and start the batch. So in order to start the batch, we type batch.begin, and as you could guess from the name, this is going to start the batch, and then we are going to end the batch. So batch.end is actually going to end the batch, and whatever code we are going to write in between is going to get displayed on the screen. So as we want to draw something on the screen, or as we want to display the text, so we type font.draw. So basically whenever we are talking about games, we don't say that we have to write something, we say that we have to draw something onto the screen. So the thing which we need to draw is the batch. So the first parameter we are going to pass is going to be the batch. So we type batch, and next parameter is going to be what we want to actually display on the screen. So let's say hello world. And now the next thing which we need to specify are going to be the XY coordinates. So whenever you are talking about graphics, in computer graphics, the 00 coordinate is right in the top left corner, but in case of Libgdx, the coordinates start from the bottom left corner. So this is basically your bottom left corner, and this is what we are going to use as 00. So let's specify the coordinates as 100, 400, and once this is done, we are done with the code. So in order to check if we have done everything correctly, we save the code and we are going to execute this on our device. So as you could see, that's what I'm looking at on my screen. So it is basically displaying hello world, and actually it is displaying a lot, and actually it is a very small text right there. So you could use some methods in order to change that. So that's it for this tutorial, and I hope you guys understood how we could display text on the screen by using Libgdx. So that's it for this tutorial, and in the next tutorial we are going to learn how we could add a simple image to Libgdx. So in this tutorial we are going to write some code which is going to display an image onto the device whenever we are developing the Libgdx game. So in the previous tutorial we have already learned how we could set up some text onto the screen. So basically this thing right here was the code for our previous tutorial. Now what we want to do is that we want to actually make a basic, or we could say a generalized structure, which we are going to use for each and every tutorial from here. So the first thing which you need to do is that you need to delete this font object, and that is because we are not going to be needing it, and you need to actually keep this Sprite batch object, and because we are going to need this in the future tutorials. And also delete the contents of the create, and make sure that you have the batch in there, and because batch is actually going to be used. And also inside the dispose method we are going to delete this font.dispose, and inside here, which is the render method, we are again going to delete the font. So as you could see, this is the basic structure which we are going to use while developing games in our app, while developing games in each and every tutorial. So basically we have the create method, the dispose method, and the render method, and we simply have only one object, which is a sprite batch object. So basically it is going to be used in each and every tutorial, so we make sure that we have it. And now let's get started with the main tutorial. And now let's go ahead and learn how we could add and use images while developing games. So the first thing which we'll need to do is that we'll need to import an image into our project. So actually I have already added one image onto the desktop. So this thing right here is an image of a flower. So I simply right click it, copy the image, return back to Android Studio, and as you could see, we have two folders. First one is the Android and the next one is the core folder, and the core folder is actually going to consist of core, which is platform independent, but as we want to add an image, we switch to this Android folder right here, and inside this folder we have one more folder which is called as the assets folder. So we simply right click on this assets folder and we paste the image, and let's name this image as, let's say, flower.png, then hit OK, and as you could see that our image has been added to the project. Now the next thing which we need to do is that we need to use this image in our project. So in order to do that, first we need to create a variable. So the first thing which we'll need to do is that we need to declare this image as a texture, and later on we need to convert it into a sprite. So in order to do that, we go right here and we declare the texture. So we type private texture, and to this we give a name as image, and that is because we'll be passing our image to it. Then we create a sprite, and a sprite is basically used whenever we want to convert or whenever we want to display an image. So basically first we need to take the image, which is nothing but the texture, and then we need to convert it into the sprite. So let's go ahead and declare the sprite. So we type private sprite and let's name it as sprite. So once we have these things with us, we go inside the create method, which is right here, and we go ahead and we get a reference to our image. So we type image, which is equal to new, and as this is a texture, we type texture, and then we specify the name of our image, which is flower.png. So as you could see, we have a reference to the image. Now the next thing which we need to do is that we need to convert this image into the sprite, and finally we need to display the sprite. So we type sprite equals new sprite, and to this we pass in the texture, and the name of our texture is image. So we pass in image here, and this is actually going to convert the image into a sprite, and finally we could use this sprite to be displayed on our screen. So once this is done, we also need to make sure that we dispose of the image after usage, or we are going to have memory leaks. So we go inside dispose right over here and we type img.dispose. So once it is disposed, we are done. And the final thing which we need to do is that we need to draw this sprite onto our screen. So we go between this begin and end, and then we type sprite.draw, and inside this we pass in the batch. So once everything is done, we are good to go. So we save the code and we run our code onto our device. So as you could see, our image has been loaded onto the screen. So we have an image of a flower on the screen, and it is placed right at the bottom. That is because we have not specified the coordinates, so by default it is going to display it at the bottom. So that's how you add an image to your screen in case of Libgdx. So basically we cannot directly add in the image to our screen. The first thing which we need to do is that we need to convert it into a texture, and we need to pass in the texture to convert it into a sprite, and the sprite is finally going to display the image on the screen. Tutorial, we are actually going to learn how we could create an animation in Libgdx. So before starting with the tutorial, the first thing which you'll need to do is that you need to clean up the code from the previous tutorial. So make sure that you delete everything and you have a basic project structure ready with you so that we could go ahead and add the code for animation. So once you are done with cleaning up the code, the next thing which we do is that we switch to animation. So what I've done is that I have downloaded some images from the internet, and you could download it too. So these are the set of images, and when we open up the images and when we run it in a sequence, it appears as though the man is running. So as you could see, when we run them in a very high frame rate, the person appears to be running. So basically we are going to apply, or we are going to make the same type of animation into our application. So the first thing which you'll need to do is that you need to download this kind of image, or you could choose any of the image from the internet. So make sure that you have at least 6 images in a row which is going to display movement of a person or movement of anything. So once you have these images with you, the next thing which we need to do is that we actually cannot use these images directly to create animation, and that is because whenever we have to create an animation of this type wherein we combine a set of images, we actually need to convert it into a thing which is called as an atlas. So in order to convert an image into atlas, actually you need a small Java program, and in order to download that Java program, you need to go to this link right here, which is code.google.com/archive/p/libgdx texture packer GUI/downloads. So make sure that you note this link down, and you need to go to this first link right here, and whenever we click it, it is going to download the link for us. And when we open up this file right here, as you could see, we have a file which is a Java file which is called as the texture packer. So we extract it to somewhere. Let's say we extract it to the desktop, and once we have extracted it, we run it, and when we open this thing up, we are going to get a window, and this window is basically going to combine your images, and it is going to make them or convert them into an atlas. So in order to convert the images into atlas, we select this new pack right here, and as the man, and as we want to make an animation of a man which is running, so we type run. You could name it anything, but make sure that you remember the name. So we click next, and then we need to select the input directory. Now the input directory is basically the path of the folder which is going to contain the images which are in sequence. So we click here, and in my case they are present in Android folder and animation images. So I hit open, and then we also need to specify the output directory. So let's select the output, and in case of output directory, we want to specify the path where our Libgdx project is located. So mine is located in this desktop folder which is called as the Andro Pro. So I simply select it, go to test, go to Android, and inside Android we need to specify these images, or we need to store these images into the assets folder. So once this is done, I click OK, and we specify the path name as run. Then once everything is done, we click on pack them all, and as you could see, it is displaying done, which means that our atlas has been created. Now if you want to have a look at what an actual atlas looks like, you could open it up. So if you go to the Android Studio, you could see that this is our run.png, and this is basically the atlas which is created. So it has basically combined the images into a sequence, and we are ready to go, and we could use these images into our program or in our application, so that we could create an animation out of it. So once everything is done, we switch to our Java code, and we need to type in some code in order to make it animate. So the first thing which we'll need to do is that we'll need to create a few variables. So the first variable which we'll need to create is going to be the texture atlas, as we are going to use atlas which we have created. So we type private texture atlas, and the name of this atlas is going to be run atlas. Now we create an animation object, so we type private animation, let's name it as animation, and then finally we need to have a variable which is going to keep track of the time passed. So we type private float, and let's name it as time passed, and initialize it to 0, as initially the time passed is going to be 0. Now the next thing which we do is that we go inside this void create method, or the create method, and we need to actually initialize the object of the run atlas. So we type run atlas equals new, and this is a texture atlas, so we type texture atlas. Then we specify the path where the actual image or the atlas lies, so we type gdx dot files dot internal, and inside this we type in run dot atlas. So make sure that you specify a proper path of your atlas right over here. So once this is done, we also initialize the object for animation, so we type animation equals new animation, and to the animation we pass in a few parameters. So the first parameter is going to be the frame per second, so how many frames we want to display. So actually we could specify 30 frames per second, but that is going to be too much for our device, so I specify 3 frames per second, so we type 1 divided by 3. Then finally we need to get the regions where this atlas is going to run, so we type run atlas dot get regions, and as you could see we are having an error onto the animation, and that is because it has actually imported animation from JavaFX. So we remove this import, and actually there are two types of import for animation. The first is contained in the Java, but actually we don't want to import from the Java package. So for importing from the Libgdx, we are going to type import com.badlogic.gdx.graphics.gd2.g2d and finally dot animation. So once we are done importing it, we could proceed with our tutorial. So once we are done importing it, we could proceed ahead. So the next thing which we do is that, as we have already created the animation object, the only thing which we need to do is that we need to dispose it off as soon as we finish it running. So we go inside here and we type run atlas, and as we want to dispose of the run atlas, we type run atlas dot dispose, and the final code which we want to execute is going to go in between this begin and end. So now the next thing which we do is that we need to increase the time passed variable, so we type time passed plus equals gdx dot graphics, and make sure that you have the G capital, so gdx dot graphics dot get delta time. And once we change the time, the next thing which we need to do is that we actually need to draw this object which we have just created from time to time. So we type batch dot draw, and in it we are going to specify some parameters. So the first parameter is going to be the get keyframe, so we type animation dot get keyframe, and inside it we are going to pass the time first, so we type time passed. So the second parameter is going to be true, and after this we are going to pass in the coordinates, so we pass the coordinates as 300 and 500. So once this is done, we are good to go. So we save the code and we execute this on our device. So when I tried to run this application, I actually got an error, and the error which I got was the image was not moving at all. Then I figured out that I have made some mistake in the code. So if you go to this animation right here, instead of 1/3 you need to type in 1/3 and then type in a F. So an F is basically used in order to display frames, so make sure that you have F here, and also make sure that you have the proper coordinates, and your coordinates may differ from device to device. So if you are using a big device, then 300 by 300 would be fine, but if you are using a small screen device, then make sure that you change this to like 100 by 100. So once everything is done, we try to run this on our phone. We select our device. So as you could see, our animation was running properly, but the thing was that it was actually running at a very low frames per seconds. So if you want to increase the rate, you could go ahead and increase it, but for the sake of this tutorial, as I am recording my phone screen, so it would be difficult for me to increase the frame rate and at the same time record the tutorial for you. So that's why I've kept the the frame rate a bit low, so you could change it according to the application which you are developing. So in order to change it, simply make it like, if you want to make it 30 frames per second, so simply add 1 divided by 30, and that should change your frame rate. So that's it for this tutorial, and I hope you guys understood how we could add animations to our game and how to animate any object which we are using in the game. This tutorial we are going to learn how to handle user input in Libgdx while developing games, and also we are going to learn what is the significance of camera while developing games in the Libgdx platform. So the first thing which we need to learn is that what is a camera in Libgdx. So a camera in Libgdx is usually different from a camera in Android. So camera is nothing but it is a kind of view it is a kind of screen which the user looks at while playing a game. So before starting with this tutorial, what I did was that I have downloaded an image from the internet, and it is a very high resolution image, and as you could see, when we scroll inside this image, we could go and have a look at each and every character inside the game from the image. So basically you need to download a image whose size is like more than 4 MB, whose size is of high resolution. And once you have this image in your folder, and once you have downloaded this image, the next thing which you need to do is that you need to make a game wherein the user is able to like scroll the entire image by just the finger gestures. So in this tutorial we are going to do the same. So basically we are going to use this image inside the game, and whenever the user wants to scroll around the image, he'll be able to do so. So in this we are doing two things. The first thing is that we are going to learn how to handle the user input, and the second thing which we are going to learn is how we could use this view so that the user could view, zoom in and zoom out. So the first thing which you need to do is that you need to take that image into our project. So in order to do that, we simply right click on the image, then click copy, then return back to Android Studio, and as you could see, there is a folder which is called as assets folder under the Android folder, and make sure that you always store your images under all these assets in this asset folder only. So when we right click on the assets folder, and when we hit paste, and let's say the name of our image is map, and also make sure that whichever image you are using, make sure that image has an PNG extension, and that is because if you try to use JPEG extension, then you might have some error. So make sure that you download a PNG image and choose a good size of the image so that the size is huge enough so that it appears to be clear when we zoom in. So once everything is done, we click OK. And as you could see, this is our image right here. So if we open up the image, you could see it appears up here in the Android Studio. Now the next thing which we need to do is that we need to take this image and we need to use this image inside our Java class. So in order to do that, the first thing which we need to do is that we need to create certain objects, and also we need to make this class implement some of the methods which are contained in the gesture listener. So the first part of this tutorial is going to be the gesture listener and how we could use gesture listener to capture the user input or to capture the actions of the user which he performs on the screen. So the first thing we need to do is that we need to use a gesture listener. So in front of this class name we type implements gesture detector dot gesture listener. So as you could see, we have implemented the gesture listener, but the thing is that we need to use some of the methods which are present in the class. So in order to add methods to this class, the next thing which we need to do is that we go right here below the render method, and in order to use code completion, we press Ctrl key and then press I, and we are going to import each and every method which is present over here. So we click OK. And as you could see, we have a bunch of methods imported, and the next thing which we need to do is that we need to understand what is the significance of each and every method. So this first method right here, which is fling, is basically used to detect a fling. So a fling is like you click something, drag it and leave it. So that's a fling, and it is similar to scrolling. And touchdown is basically when you touch on the screen and you hold it for a while. So that is touchdown, and tap is basically when you immediately tap something onto the screen. Long press is again similar to the touchdown, so if you press on the screen and if you hold it for a long period of time, it is the long press. And pan is basically when you zoom in onto the map, and then pan stop is when you stop panning. And actually pan is when you float from left to right, and zoom is when you zoom inside the screen. And finally pinch is while you just pinch the screen, which is the normal operation which we do when we want to make the size of the image small. And for the sake of this tutorial, we'll be actually only working with this pan right here. So the next thing which we do is that we cut this pan, we go right above here and we are going to paste it here, and that is because we are going to need this eventually. So once this is done, the next thing which we need to do is that we need to set up certain objects over here. And so that's it for this tutorial, and in the next tutorial we'll be actually setting up the objects so that we could use them so as to develop a game in which we could display this map right here and the user could actually pan through the map. So as you could see right now we have an error, and that is because we have these overrides here, so make sure that you delete it. And as discussed in the previous tutorial, we are only going to work with this pan right here. So whenever the user pans onto the screen, he will be able to notice eventual changes. So the next thing which we need to do is that we need to create certain objects inside the main class. So the next thing which we do is that we go here and we initialize a few objects. So the first object is going to be the camera object, and the camera object which we are going to use, or the class which we are going to use, is going to be the orthographic camera. So we type private, then we type orthographic camera, and let's name the object as camera. So orthographic camera is a camera which is used for like 2D purposes, and as in this case we are going to develop 2D games, so we are going to use the orthographic camera. Next thing which we need to do is that we need to use textures. So we type private texture, let's name it as texture, and after texture one more thing which we need is going to be the sprite. So we type private sprite and let's name it as sprite. So once we have these objects, we go inside the onCreate, and here we write the code which we want to execute. So inside the create we usually just initialize the object, so let's go ahead and do that. So we have three objects, the camera, texture and sprite. So let's go ahead and initialize three of them. So the first thing which we need to do is we need to initialize the camera. So we type camera equals new orthographic camera, and inside it we specify a few parameters. So the first parameter is going to be the width, and the second parameter is going to be the height. Now as in this case we don't know the width and the height, we are going to extract the width and the height from the gdx.graphics. So we type gdx.graphics.getWidth, and then we are going to type in gdx.graphics.getWidth. This should be actually get height. Okay, so once we have passed in the height and the width, the next thing which we need to do is that we need to initialize the texture object. So in order to initialize the texture object, we type texture equals new texture, and inside it we need to pass in the path of the file. So basically the file which we have is going to be the map.png. so inside it we pass in gdx.files, as we need to pass in a file, .internal, and then we need to specify the name of our image. So in this case we are going to type map.png, and finally we initialize the sprite object. We type sprite equals new sprite, and to this we pass in the texture object which we have just created. So we type in texture, and finally we are going to set the position of the sprite. So we type sprite dot set position, and we need to place it in the center. So in order to place it in the center, we type minus sprite dot get width, and basically we are going to pass in the center coordinates. So in order to get the center coordinates, we are going to type in this divided by 2, which is going to give us the x central coordinate, and the next thing which we type in is minus sprite dot get height divided by 2, and this is basically going to give us the y central coordinate. So once we pass the central coordinate position for both x and y, we are pretty much done. And the next thing which we need to do is that we need to set up the input processor. So in order to do that, we type gdx dot input dot set input processor, and set input processor is basically used in order to manipulate or in order to gauge the user input. So we type new gesture detector, and to this we pass in this, as we are working with the current object. So now we are done with the code inside the create. Now the next thing which we need to do is that we need to dispose of the resources which we have used. So the first resource we are going to dispose of is going to be the texture. So we type texture dot dispose, and it is eventually going to dispose the texture when we are done using it. Now once this is done, the only thing which we need to do is that we need to go into this render, and right before begin we actually need to set the projection. So in order to set the projection, we type in batch dot set projection matrix, and to this we pass camera dot combined, and this is basically used in order to set the projection of the camera. So once everything is done, we finally need to add the code to the begin. So we go inside the begin, and the only line of code which we are going to add is going to be sprite.draw. So we type sprite.draw, and to this we are going to pass the batch as we did in each and every Libgdx tutorial. So once we are done with this, we are done with the main code, and the final thing which we need to do is that we need to add some line of codes to the pan method so as to get the user input and manipulate it. So we type camera dot translate, and it is basically going to change the camera positions, and to this we are going to pass in minus delta x comma delta y. So these are the basic coordinate positions which we have right here, and we just pass them inside this. And the final thing which we need to do, as once we have the coordinates, we want to update the camera according to these coordinates. So we type camera dot update. So once this is done, we are done with the code. So in order to check our output, we save the code and we execute this on our device, and as you could see, this is what right now I am able to see on my device, and I could pan through the entire image. And the thing is that we need to choose an appropriate size image. That is because if we pan too much, we are going to get out of the image. So as you could see, I could basically go through each and every screen, and that's it. So that's it for this tutorial, and I hope you guys understood how to handle the user input in Libgdx and how to use pan in order to pan through the image which we have in our game. Tutorial we are going to learn something about the sound effects in Libgdx. So basically, whenever you are designing a game, one more thing which you need to include along with the images and animations is the sound. So in this tutorial we are going to go through some basics. We are not going to go in much depth, so we are basically going to go through how a sound is played in Libgdx games. So basically, the first thing which you need to do is that you need to have a sound file with you. So in my case, I have a sound file which I have downloaded from the internet, and it is a sound file of alarm beep, and it is a WAV format file. So make sure that you download a file, and it is actually only 3 seconds long. So once you have this file with you, we simply copy this and we go inside our assets folder, and instead of just pasting it in the assets folder, we are going to make a new folder or new directory, and we are going to name it as sounds. So once we have this sounds directory, we are going to paste our sounds in here so as to properly organize everything inside our folder. So the next thing which we need to do is that we need to give it a name. So let's say we only name it as beep so that it becomes easy for us to work with it. So as you could see, this is our sound file right here. Now the next thing which we do is that we go ahead and use this into our Java class. So the first thing which we need to do is that we need to create objects. So we need to create a sound objects, and actually there are two types of objects. There is a music object and there is a sound object. So music object is used whenever you want to add a background music which is much longer, but as in this case we are using a music which is only 3 seconds long, we are going to go with the sound. So we create a sound object right over here. So we type sound and we need to import sound. So we press Alt enter and it is automatically going to import sound. And the next thing which we want to do is that we want to name this sound as something. So let's say we name it as game sound, and once this is done we are good to go. Now the only thing which we need to do is that we need to go into this create right here and we need to add in the input processor. So we type gdx.input.set input processor, and this is basically used in order to handle the user input. And as you could see we are getting an error, and that is because the entire gdx should be in capital letters, and this is showing us an error, and that is because we have not implemented the input processor. So we go ahead in front of our class name and we type implements input processor. So as you could see, when we add this implements, it is going to show us an error, and that is because we need to override some methods. So we go right ahead below render and we press Ctrl I and we select each of the methods present here. So as you could see, these are the methods which are basically used to process the user input, and in this case we are only going to use one method which is called as touchdown. So touchdown is basically used when we touch down or when we click the screen and we hold it for a while. So we copy this, or rather we cut this method right here, and we are going to paste it at the top so that we could work with it. And also make sure that you delete this overrides, or else it is going to give you an error. So once you have this touchdown method up here, the next thing which we need to do is that first we need to initialize the sound objects. So inside create, we initialize the object which we have just created above here, which is nothing but the game sound. So we type game sound equals gdx dot audio, then we type dot new sound, and inside it we actually specify the path in which we have the sound. So we type gdx dot files dot internal, and our sounds are actually present in the sounds directory. So we type sounds, and inside sounds we have a file which is called as beep.wav. So we type /beep.wav. So once this is done, we have initialized the sound object. Now the only thing which we need to do is that we actually need to play the sound. So in order to play the sound, as we need to play the sound inside this touchdown, and that is because whenever the user touches down on the screen we need to play the sound. So we simply go here and then we type in game sound dot play. So this is basically going to play the sound whenever we touch down the screen. So once this is done, we are good to go, but the only thing which remains is that whenever we run this, it is going to consume our resources, and we should always dispose of our resources whenever we are done using them. So we go inside this dispose, and the only piece of code which we add is we dispose this sound object which we have just created. So in order to dispose it, we type in game sound dot dispose. So once everything is done, you could save the code and you could run your application on your device. And in this case, I'm not going to run this application on my device, and that is because it is eventually going to record the video, but I actually cannot record the audio on my device. So make sure that you run this application on your device and check if you have the sound. And you could face a problem wherein your volume or the device volume is very low. So for that, if you have a low volume, then you have to make a little bit change in this code right here. So if you go to the game sound on create, you could go here and you could create a new variable which is called as sound ID. So we type sound ID, and you could equate this to game sound.play, and this basically is going to store the ID of the sound, and make sure that you give it a type of long. So we type long here, and we are going to use the same ID to increase the sound of this thing right here. So in order to do that, we type game sound dot set volume, and inside it we are going to pass in the sound ID, which is nothing but sound ID. So we type sound ID comma, and then if you want to increase the volume by 90%, so we type 0.9 F, and that is eventually going to increase the volume of your sound, and that is eventually going to increase the volume of the music right here. So that's it for this tutorial, and I hope you guys understood how we could implement sound effects in Libgdx while developing games. So thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you.